Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. I'm Brennan and today we're doing another team preview and we're looking at my team, the Montreal Canadiens. Now the Montreal Canadiens had a big offseason. They really took a lot of gambles and it looks like they're really gunning towards making the playoffs this year. And despite the fact that they did technically make the playoffs in last year's whole bubble scenario, they haven't really been a true playoff team in the last couple years. But they did make a lot of additions and we're going to start with that. Now, the Montreal Canadiens signed Michael Frolik recently to a one-year deal, close to league minimum contract, and Frolik is probably just going to serve as a fourth liner or kind of a depth forward. I think this is a good depth pickup for Montreal. Doesn't necessarily move the needle a lot, but that being said, you can never have too much depth. They also traded for and then signed Joel Edmondson. Now, there is a lot of divide within the hockey community and the Montreal community about the addition of Joel Edmondson. That being said, I do like the addition. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the contract, but I think Edmondson is going to provide a good defensive presence and physicality, which is something that Montreal kind of needs right now, and is another defenseman to really insulate and help Carey Price. I do think that Carey Price will like this addition, because Edmondson is basically another Ben Sherratt. And I remember when Ben Sherratt was signed, a lot of people, including myself, said that that was a poor signing and he would be the next Carl Alzner. But Sherratt fit in Montreal's system perfectly, and I don't see any reason why Joel Edmondson can't. I do think that Edmondson is a better skater than Ben Sherratt, and I do think he is going to bring a lot to this Montreal lineup. But they also traded for backup goaltender Jake Allen. Now, I think that this is actually a really critical add for the Montreal Canadiens. Montreal has not had a true backup probably since the likes of Peter Budaj, and I think that Allen is a bit more than just a backup. In my opinion, I think Allen is a 1B goaltender and is one of the best backups in the NHL, period. So I do think that Allen is going to be able to take away a lot of starts from Carey Price. So if we're looking at a 56-game schedule, I think that you can probably start Allen for about 20 of those games, and he's going to give you good starts. He is going to bring you close to a 500 record, if not more. So I think Allen is arguably one of the best backup goalies Montreal has had within the last 20 years, and I do like signing him to an extension. Worst case scenario, Seattle picks him up, but if not, then you've got 3 more solid years of really, really good goaltending. So I do really like the Jake Allen addition for Montreal, and I think he's actually going to be one of Montreal's most valuable players. But then there's Josh Anderson, who this is a very controversial one. Obviously, he was traded for Max Domi and a third-round pick, but the contract is where all the discussions happen with Anderson. But, not talking about the contract for a second, there is a lot that Anderson can bring to this lineup as long as he's healthy. Anderson is a fast power forward. He's got decent hands. He brings a good two-way game, which Montreal is big on. He can play on the penalty kill. He can play on the power play as well. So he's a very useful forward and should provide a big physical presence up front and should be able to score, the pace of 20 goals over an 82-game schedule. But then my favorite addition for the Montreal Canadiens this offseason would be the addition of Tyler Toffoli. Now, I think getting Tyler Toffoli for 4 years at $4.25 million is an absolute steal. That's less than what he was making before, and he just came off a really good year between the Los Angeles Kings and the Vancouver Canucks. I think that playing, in a more offensive system like Montreal will really kind of bring up Toffoli's offensive totals compared to what they were in LA. That being said, I'm not expecting Toffoli to be, a 40-goal scorer or anything, but I do think that a 25-goal pace over an 82-game schedule is reasonable. I think he could potentially hit 20 and 56, and I'm really hoping he does. Toffoli's been one of my favorite players in the NHL for a long time. I share a jersey number with him, so it's really exciting for him to come to Montreal, and I think he should be a perfect fit. He's a good possession winger and kind of fits that Montreal system and mold perfectly. Now, so far this offseason, Montreal really hasn't had to trade away a lot of pieces. I do expect them to probably move out a guy like Paul Byron or Brett Kulak, but it hasn't happened at the time of this recording, so I can't report on that yet. But they did trade away Max Domi. Now, Max Domi wasn't fitting in well in his last season in Montreal, and despite the fact that he looked like a star the year before, this year it just wasn't meant to be. In the regular season, he struggled with his consistency. When he was hot, he was absolutely, scoring a goal per game, and it was great. But he spent more time being cold than hot, and his overall play actually, cost Montreal some goals, and he isn't a very responsible defensive player either. And then in the playoffs, we saw even more of this. Aside from one good game, Domi was practically invisible. It doesn't help that he was put on the fourth line, but that shows an obvious distrust between him and head coach Claude Julien, and the writing was on the wall that Max Domi was going to be out for Montreal. I personally think that Montreal should have got more for Max Domi, but that being said, I don't mind the Anderson pickup, but I think Domi's, his feistiness might be missed a little bit in Montreal, but you are getting some of that back with Josh Anderson. They also bought out Carl Alsner, which Alsner has been an AHL level defenseman for the past couple of years. That's not really a big loss, and the same goes for Christian Folin. So really, the only notable piece that Montreal lost is Max Domi, and when you look at what they added, it's not like they're really going to be hurting from their offseason additions and subtractions. Now, Montreal does have a surprisingly solid top six. That being said, there isn't a lot of star power here, practically none, but there is the potential for there to be some. The top line is Thomas Tatar, Philip Deneau, and Brendan Gallagher. Now, that is one of the best possession top lines in the NHL. All those guys do have pretty good analytical numbers, but I think they're all good in their own right. Thomas Tatar is probably the most natural scorer out of all of them. I do think he's one of Montreal's best offensive threats. His defensive game isn't the strongest, but playing with two good defensive forwards like Gallagher and Deneau definitely help out. To me, Deneau is one of the most underrated centermen in the NHL. I think he could possibly have a Selke trophy in his future. The only problem with Deneau is that his goal scoring isn't really there. His playmaking ability and his offensive instincts are strong, but that being said, he doesn't utilize his shot enough, because it's not like he has a bad shot. He just doesn't choose to shoot that much, being more of a playmaker, but it's the defensive side of the game where Deneau really makes his money. He is one of the best shutdown centermen in the NHL. We saw that against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and we've seen that for the past couple of years in Montreal. But then Brendan Gallagher is kind of the guy for forward for Montreal. He's the heart and soul of the team, and he was just recently signed to a long-term, pretty high AAV contract. So Montreal's going to be counting on Gallagher to be that guy for them for a long time. I think Gallagher's probably the future captain, and is kind of one of the faces of this franchise right now. Gallagher's fantastic. He tries his best every game, and it's really admirable. But then going into some of the other guys in that top six, I would say that Nick Suzuki has definitely pushed himself into a top six role. He kind of projects as the first line centerman of the future, and possibly as soon as next season. Suzuki has so much potential, and just like Deneau, he's a very responsible defensive centerman. I do think that there is a lot more offensive potential there with Suzuki, but I'm not sure how much offense. I think at the peak of his career, he might be a 70-point centerman with a really strong defensive game, and is definitely a guy I could see winning a Selke trophy at some point. Suzuki is getting a lot of hype right now, and it's easy to see why. He was fantastic in the plans, and there's a lot of hype around him. I still think that Jonathan Drouin fits into this top six as well. Drouin has struggled with his consistency and to stay healthy these last couple of years. But that being said, Drouin, when he started the year before he ended up getting injured, actually looked really good and was Montreal's best player. If he's able to rebound to that form, and kind of the form that we saw in the playoffs, Drouin could finally end up, becoming a prominent player in Montreal. And although I think that trade is never going to look good for Montreal, Mikhail Sergachev is kind of a beast, Drouin could at least make it look a little bit better. And then I do think Tyler Toffoli is probably the sixth best forward there. That being said, I don't think he ends up playing in the top six. But for right now, I'd say that Toffoli is kind of the sixth best forward, and is a good goal scoring threat, and is a good player at all aspects of the game. Now, Montreal has a pretty strong top four when it comes to the defensive aspect of the game. Joel Edmondson and Ben Sherratt are some pretty solid defense guys, both physical, both hard to play against. And although I'm not sure if Edmondson should exactly be a top four guy, I do think he's probably the weakness in that top four. I don't think that he's going to stand out as being a terrible defenseman either. I do like his physicality. We did talk about that earlier. Sherratt really had an amazing year in Montreal. He did show a little bit of offensive instincts to go along with a strong defensive game, playing beside Shea Weber, but the two studs in Montreal are Shea Weber and Jeff Petrie. Both those guys are still really good at their ages. I think Jeff Petrie is Montreal's most dynamic defenseman, and is arguably going to be their best defenseman this upcoming season. He's got a lot of offensive instincts. He's got a very good and accurate shot for a defenseman, and his overall game is quite strong. The only problem with Petrie is that he always seems to have a negative plus-minus, but when you play so much and Montreal hasn't been a good team of late, it kind of makes sense. Shea Weber, as long as he can stay healthy, is still one of the better defensemen in the NHL. He's got the big booming shot. He can pass. The only problem with Weber is that his skating has really taken a step backwards, and he's quite slow. That being said, he still uses his stick well, his body well, and is a smart defenseman. So overall, I think Montreal's top four has improved with the addition of Joel Edmondson, and I think with some rookies coming up, it can get even better. Now, I think that Montreal is possibly the best goaltending tandem in the NHL, maybe behind Boston or Dallas. But Carey Price and Jake Allen is a tandem that I think is going to give the opposition headaches a lot of nights. Carey Price is still voted as as the best goaltender in the NHL by the players. I personally don't think he's that anymore, but I do think he does float around that top three range with Andrei Vasilevsky, Connor Hellebuyck, and maybe Tuukka Rask. But Jake Allen, I already talked about. He's one of the best backup goalies in the league, and I think that tandem going forward is going to be really good for Montreal, and I don't think the goaltending has been this strong in a long time for Montreal. Now, Montreal is a very diverse core of best players, from every position, really. Carey Price is considered to be their best player, and I do agree with that. But then I would say that Shea Weber and Jeff Petrie should also make their way into this core five. Those two guys are both still really good defensemen at their age. And then I would say that probably Brendan Gallagher and Philip Deneau kind of complete that top five. So that is a decent core, and although there isn't a lot of star power outside of Carey Price, I do think that a guy like Nick Suzuki is definitely going to push his way into this best five players as soon as next season, and could end up looking a lot better. So although it's not one of the best core fives in the NHL right now, I do think it is solid. But now getting into some players I want to talk about. Now to start off, I want to talk about one of the most hyped prospects in the NHL, in Alexander Romanov. By all means, Romanov should be playing in Montreal's top six this year. He could push his way into a top four spot, and it wouldn't surprise me. I do think that Romanov gets overhyped sometimes. I don't think that he's going to put up the offensive totals, but I think his defensive game and his physical presence is going to be really strong. Over a 56-game schedule, I could see Romanov putting up about 15 or 20 points, and I think that is a realistic expectation. I think at Romanov's peak, he's going to be similar to an Ivan Provorov, putting up 30 or 40 points, but with a really strong defensive game and physical presence. Despite not being a big defenseman, Romanov uses his body well. He's built very well, and he can hit like a machine, really. So I am excited to see Romanov play, and by all accounts, he should be really good. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to make in his rookie season, though. But then I want to talk about Philip Deneau. Now, I already talked about how good Philip Deneau is in basically all aspects of the game, but I more so want to talk about the contract situation with Philip Deneau. Deneau is heading into the last year of his deal, and he already said that he doesn't necessarily want to end up as that third-line center, which he's kind of projected to be with guys like Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Nick Suzuki coming up. If Philip Deneau isn't happy being that third-line center, then I think Montreal might have to end up trading him. You don't want to lose a guy to free agency for nothing. Ideally, I would want to keep Philip Deneau. I think he is a very key part to this team, and if they can keep Deneau happy by kind of rolling three lines similar to how the New York Islanders do, I think that would keep Deneau happy as long as you've got offensive guys on his wing, whether that's Brendan Gallagher or if he's playing lower down the lineup with a guy like, maybe Tyler Toffoli. I do really like Deneau. I like his overall game, and I think he's a very critical piece for Montreal, so I think Montreal should do everything in their power to keep him around. That being said, you can't overpay for a guy that you do honestly envision as the third-line center a couple years from now, with the progress of a guy like Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who had a really good playoffs, but I'm not sure where his development is going to go. I think he should be better this season. I think his sophomore slump is hopefully an outlier. So if Kotkaniemi can end up pushing his way into that top six, that could make Deneau's role even smaller and potentially drive him out of town. But the last player I want to talk about is Josh Anderson. Now, Josh Anderson is coming off a brutal year, which he only scored one goal and was injured. That being said, I fully expect Josh Anderson to bounce back. It is reported that he is healthy, so that is good. And Montreal is really going to have to bank on him, bouncing back and being healthy. 7 years at $5.5 million is an overpayment, in all honesty. And even though I like all of Marc Bergevin's work this offseason, I do think that they definitely overpaid for Josh Anderson, and that contract could end up looking like an anchor if Josh Anderson isn't able to turn into the player we saw a couple seasons ago in Columbus. He is a goal-scoring threat. He is a good overall offensive player. But that being said, you're really looking for that physicality from Josh Anderson, sticking up for his line mates. And I do think he could fit very well on a line with Jonathan Drouin and Nick Suzuki. I think that that would kind of inflate some of his goal totals, playing with two really good playmakers. But Anderson would also be able to keep up with those guys with his impressive foot speed for a big man and his physical presence. So I do like the addition of Josh Anderson for the Montreal Canadiens, but that being said, he definitely needs to perform well, or else that contract is going to look terrible fast. Now, I would classify Montreal as a bubble team still. I think they made, for the most part, a lot of good moves this offseason, and apparently they're still interested in some guys like Andreas Athanasiou. I personally would like to see that happen. But, Bergevin's still making moves. He just recently, well, actually today, at the time I'm recording this video, signed Michael Frolik. So things could change from now on when this video gets edited and uploaded. But for right now, I do like all of Montreal's offseason moves for the most part. I do think that they are going to be a better team. I'm just not sure how much better. And I'm not sure if they're going to be able to make it into the top four in that Canadian division. I personally think that they probably do. I think the overall depth in their lineup is probably the best depth in Canada. But that being said, their star power is kind of probably dead last behind Ottawa. I don't think that there's a lot of star power here in Montreal, but there is a lot of good, top six, top four guys. And I think the overall depth and and scoring depth in their lineup should help. Plus, a rested and healthy Carey Price and Shea Weber should do wonders for the Montreal Canadiens. So I would classify them as a bubble team. I'm not confident saying they're a contender, but I also don't think they're a rebuilder. You can tell, the direction of the franchise definitely isn't rebuilding. They're trying to come out of this rebuild, or retool as it's been called, and with the additions of Tyler Toffoli and Josh Anderson, these guys are here long term, so Montreal should be a good team, if not this season, then the next couple seasons, with guys like Cole Caulfield coming up, and the development of Kotkaniemi, Suzuki, and Romanov. Montreal is a very solid young core, and could end up being a very good team in a few years, but right now I'm not sure where they're going to land, but I do have hopes that they are going to be able to make it in the Canadian division. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.